You're listening to another edition of the Wealth Foundation podcast, where we help educate listeners on how to create a solid wealth foundation to build their dreams. And now your hosts.
Well, welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we have a great show, and we also have a very special guest. But before we introduce him, I just want to say my name is Eric Cavallo. I am the director of the Wealth Foundation. And joining me today is our co-host, founder of Hurricane Financial, Frank Rydell. How you doing, Frank?
I'm good. How are you guys today?
Excellent, excellent. So over the past few shows, we've been talking a lot about the mechanics of the infinite banking concept. And today we want to get a little more personal. So we have a special guest, and today joining us is Dr. David Bond of the Seattle, Washington area. And Dave, we're excited for you to join and glad you could be here. Thank you.
Eric, Frank, thanks for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here as well and looking forward to our conversation today.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about has been very analytical and nuts and bolts, and people have been sending us questions in, and we figured let's change it around and maybe get the perspective of a client and friend of ours who is actually using it. I mean, Frank and I both have policies and we understand it, but we're also looking at it from a different angle. So Dave, maybe from your aspect, I would say, how did you first actually hear about the infinite banking concept?
Yeah, Eric. So I first heard about the infinite banking concept from you. We'd had conversations. The audience doesn't know this, but we're ski buddies. And so we've had plenty of time up at Mount Baker on the chairlifts, kicking around ideas and dreams. And you'd shared this concept of personal finance and becoming your own banker with me. When I got married, you were kind enough to gift my wife and I a book that went over the concept of infinite banking and how to use it as a tool in your personal and professional life. And so I really learned about it from you, and then did some reading and research on my own so that I could feel comfortable about using policies and using the concept in my own life.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome, Dave. I'm glad you enjoyed it and appreciated it. I mean, the reason why I gave that to you and tell people about this concept, and I've been so excited about it, is if you've ever seen a good movie or heard a great CD or watch a TV show and you love it, well, what do you naturally do? Well, you tell everyone you know about the whole concept, and that's what I've done with Dave and the banking concept. You mentioned reading, and I gave you the book. After you read it, what did you initially think of the concept or the book itself?
So I actually read two books. The one that you gave me as a gift was Dwayne Burnell's book. It's A Path to Financial Peace of Mind. And so it was really great because I felt like it gave the concept of infinite banking and how to use participating whole life policies as a financial tool. And it gave a lot of practical examples. There were plenty of numbers, and as well as the concepts explained in a really accessible way for me because I don't have a background in finance. And then I also read Nash's book and learned a lot from that. And I felt like my takeaway from that book was more about just some of the perils of our financial construct. And if you're just using other people's money versus being your own banker, you're leaving a lot on the table and you're losing a lot of control with your personal finances. So I think I had different takeaways from those two different books.
Dave, this is Frank. I'd like to ask you a couple questions. I appreciate you dialing in and joining us today. A lot of clients that I talk with, the process of getting started with a policy can be a little scary to people initially when they're first hearing about the concept. You mentioned two books, and that they both gave you different points of view of how to construct an infinite banking system and how to utilize the policies within. I know that the infinite banking book, or the Bank on Yourself book, is designed to be a book that is heavily conceptual. So Becoming Your Own Banker, heavily conceptual book. The book that you referenced, The Path to Financial Peace of Mind, you're right. That is a lot more numerical, and there's a lot more graphs and charts and that type of thing in there. So they do come at it from different angles. When I'm talking with clients, a lot of times, Dave, one of the biggest things that I have to get across to them is the concept of using somebody else's money, the concept of creating a pool of money where interest is flowing back to you by using the policy correctly. So when you got started and we had initial conversations about setting up the policy, setting up the structure, and how all the mechanical pieces work, let me just ask you from a client's perspective, how easy or how hard would you say that process of getting started in using your policy was? Was it fairly easy, or was it something that took you time to get comfortable with?
Frank, I'd answer that and say both. It was a very easy process. You and Angela made it really easy, and Eric assisted too with getting the policy set up. I think the hardest part about it was being available for a medical exam, and that was done right in my home. It was really, really very easy and straightforward. But it did take some time for me to read and just kind of digest everything and make sure this was going to be the right approach for me and my family. And I don't think it was difficult. It just took a little bit of due diligence on my part. And then I think also I've really learned more about the policies, having put them into place, and then actually getting the benefit from using them and having them as a financial tool over the past several years. And so I think it's been a gradual process, and I'm still learning quite a bit as I go along to this day.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I've been telling folks for years that I had a policy for over 12 months before I can actually say I knew exactly how it worked, which is pretty amazing, because if you look at my background, within the insurance industry and within the estate planning industry, you would think that I would know this inside out and backwards. Well, I understood the concept enough to know that it was a good thing, and know that anytime I could use somebody else's money and create my own system of finance, that's good. And I love the fact that it was all in a tax favorable environment. But it took me about a year as I went through, as you were talking about, going through the process of, it wasn't really difficult, but just getting comfortable with using the money and feeling like it's okay to use it when you needed it and that type of thing. Which brings me to another question I had was, can you tell us a little bit about your first usage into infinite banking, the first time you utilized the policy for something, and how did that go?
Sure, Frank. So I was this is a second career for me. I'm a physical therapist now, and I've been a firefighter previously, and I switched careers in my 30s. And when I did so, there was a change in my income, a change in my financial situation. And I had these policies in place, and I was able to actually, without taking in income per se, I was able to access money to help some cash flow happen during my graduate school experience. And then I was able to pay that money back to myself, continue to make dividends on the money that was in my policies. And so I felt like it was a win-win. I still had savings. I was able to borrow money and use it to make my life work, my schooling work. And then it was good practice. I was able to use it again a second time shortly after school before I'd really amassed a lot of savings again. And we were able to put down a down payment on a house that's just in a perfect spot relative to where my wife and I work. So I've used it a couple of times already. And it's been nice to have the flexibility with paying back loans. So as I pay myself back or pay the policy back, I can pay as much as I want. I could pay the whole thing off in one lump sum. I could kick the can down the road and not make any payment for a while, or just cover the interest. It's really flexible. So those have been kind of my initial experiences with utilizing the policies as a financial tool in my personal life, and they've been positive experiences.
Well, we appreciate you saying that, and appreciate you spending some time and coming on here today. It's been very helpful, and I know we may have another question or two for you, but Eric, I just wanted to say, if you look at this scenario and what we're talking about today with Dr. Bond, he is the classic infinite banking person, is the person who's not just getting a policy, but understanding how to overlay concept on top. And he mentioned getting into a house and those type of things. I mean, when you can take expenses and you can turn those into opportunities to gain wealth from the things that you're already going to spend money on in your life, it is amazing how powerful this vehicle and this tool is. So again, thank you, Dave, for being on here. And Eric, we just probably need to bring on more people like Dave onto calls. And because sometimes I think people get tired of hearing us simply talking from the advisor standpoint. I think it's very helpful sometimes to hear people talking from the client standpoint and the person that's actually using the policies.
Yeah, we greatly appreciate Dave being on the show. And I think, Dave, you're like myself, very analytical. And I would say above and beyond a lot of other clients, you really grasp the idea before you jumped into it. Some people like Frank start off where they create it and say, okay, what did I just do? How do I use it? But you really had the concept down, and then you just looked for opportunities with your life changes. Real quick, as far as getting out a loan and financing and paying for some of these transitions that you made, how hard was that to actually get a policy loan?
Eric, it's been really easy. If you take out a loan under a certain threshold with my policy, and of course, I think that you could have a policy with a number of different companies, or you could have your policy structured in different ways. But for me, if I stay under a certain threshold, it's as simple as going online, accessing my account, and I can request a policy loan, and it's on its way to me immediately. If it's over that threshold, you have to send in a form, sign a letter. It might have to be notarized. I'm not sure. I don't recall off the top of my head, but it's pretty easy. Just a little bit of paperwork, and the money's coming to you within a week or so. So it's pretty easy. And the nice thing is you don't have to justify what you're doing to anybody else. If it makes sense to you, you can access that cash value in your policy. You can borrow against it. And I think that's important though too, is that there is nobody who is telling you yes or no. So it's important for the owner of the policy, the person who's using it as a financial tool, to have a little bit of prudence, and you can't just, raid the piggy bank for every little thing and not pay it back, or it won't work for you. I don't recall which book it was in, but they made they gave an image of a store owner who was just taking produce and canned goods and different things out the back of the store and not paying for them. And if you do that with your policy, it's not going to work well for you. But as long as you're responsible and paying it back, I found it to be very easy to access the money and very easy to pay it back on flexible terms.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think a lot of people don't necessarily get the concept that you can take money out. I mean, if you lost your job and you went to get a home loan or a home equity line of credit, they're going to ask for your credit score. They're going to ask for your income. They're going to ask for statements. The beauty of using the infinite banking policy is this is a savings account and a bank account that doesn't ask questions. You can use it for your down payment. You can use it for your education, or if times do change and potentially get rough, you have that comfort knowing that you have some money in the bank that's easily accessible. Real quick, Dave, as far as you've described how you used it in the past, is there anything you're using it for today? Or I don't want to give in any future plans that you might have coming up, but what are you using for your policy loans and your banking today, and what might you use it for in the future?
Those are good questions, Eric. So I have some ideas of things that I may do professionally down the road. And just like you mentioned, if you're not an employee working for somebody else, I think there are a lot more questions that are asked when you go to borrow money. And so down the road, if I was to have my own business, be an entrepreneur, be a professional, hanging my own shingle, it may be very nice to have access to money to finance that, where I don't have to justify it to anyone but myself. And I think that that's going to be a potential benefit for me. Another thing that I think is going to be a benefit, I've got a policy that is, I'm the owner of the policy at this point in time, but it's my son's policy. And so as he gets older, my plan is to let him learn about responsible use of money, and he can borrow from himself. So when the time comes and he wants to, buy his first car, maybe he doesn't have enough money saved up, instead of getting a loan from a credit union or a bank, he can borrow from himself and pay back the money and benefit from it the same way that I have. If he's irresponsible, the only person that he hurts is just himself with his bottom line in his own bank account. But a little bit of insulation from damaging his credit score at an early age and that sort of thing. So I see that as being a potential benefit, a way for him to finance maybe his education and his initial life outside of our family life when he steps out on his own. So I think that those are a couple ways that I could see using these policies in the future.
Yeah, that's wonderful. People really don't understand that this is a generational plan if you're working with the right agent or advisor, and we can structure it to create guaranteed wealth for future generations down the line. I mean, that's something that Nelson Nash describes in his book. So Dave, we really appreciate you being on the show and sharing your perspective and your experience from a client and also as a friend. Frank, is there anything you wanted to add before we close out the show today?
No, I just wanted to, again, thank Dave for being on the show. It's been fantastic, and I love hearing that perspective. I just say, keep doing what you're doing, Dave. You have not just set up an infinite banking structure that's working for you, but I love the multi-generational approach that you have. I think this is something that's going to be a huge benefit to your son as he grows up, and future generations of members of the Bond family. I could see 2, 3, 4 generations out in the future, people continuing to teach the concept and learn proper use of money and how to be fiscally responsible. And I just think it's a tremendous thing. I wish more people did it. And I would just say a lot of credit to you for getting this ball started.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate that. Yeah, one thing I didn't say, I think it's kind of neat. You think of money as being something, I think people tend to be a little bit, shy about wanting to pursue wealth or to be to have money, sometimes there's an idea that, maybe poverty is almost like an ideal or something. And certainly I don't think that having financial resources is what defines somebody's value. But I think it's interesting when you start thinking about your own family's wealth multi-generationally. It makes you think about other things in a longer time frame. And I think that's a neat concept too, where maybe you're thinking about your impact on the environment or other things that are a little bit more altruistic. And it's kind of a neat concept too.
Well, Dr. David Bond, I think that sums it up just perfectly. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you to my co-host, Frank Rydell from Hurricane Financial. We appreciate everyone tuning in. Look forward to next week, and please feel free to call or visit our websites if you have any additional questions. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Foundation podcast. The contents of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only, and not to be viewed as advice. Results may vary, and listeners are encouraged to seek professional financial advice. To learn more or to submit a question, please visit www.thewealthfoundation.org or call 844-OWN-BANK. That's 844-696-2265. Find us on your favorite social media by searching for #The Wealth Foundation.